Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I am Annika Jackson here with a very, very special guest. I'm really excited, Elizabeth Mikotowicz, that you are on the show, sharing your story with us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I know we've been trying to make this happen for a while. And I love that you've been able to take life situations that are a little more complex than we usually think about on the show and figure out how to turn pain and prison and trauma and addiction into purpose and really finding your calling. So that's the only tease I'm going to give because I really want to hear from you yourself. So please share your journey with us.
Thank you. Well, I was adopted into a really great family. I had a lot of support, a lot of love. I was never exposed to violence or drugs or, anything like that. But once I got out into my own, I got into some really abusive relationships. And I got assaulted to the point, my skull was showing.
Oh my God.
Just one assault. And a month prior to that, he'd put me in the hospital, ragdolling me around the room, and I hit the back of my head off a radiator. So this was 2 head injuries back to back. And when I went to the hospital, I found out I was pregnant. So this was my second time getting pregnant on birth control because generic brands don't work as well as, the regular ones. And they gave me opioids. And at first I took them. But once they sent me to the pain clinic and I started getting seizures and going deaf and blind for moments at a time. It really altered my life. I was no longer a safe caregiver for my daughter. I would wake up on the ground not knowing how long I'd been. And, as a parent, that's so scary. I'm like, she's 14 months old. Like, you have to be like this. You have to be awake for a toddler.
Yeah.
And, coming to that conclusion, like, I'm not safe for her. So, I did what I could and I, put her with my dad and, he was in the apartment below me. So I could always go down and see her. But, it's just the fact is, like, I'm not, okay enough and there's nothing I can do about it. So once they sent me to the pain clinic and I realized, like, this was going to be a regular thing, I was like, I don't want to be on this. I've already watched my entire community get addicted to pills. Big Pharma came in through the back door and just flooded our communities up in Maine with Oxys, Vicodin, Percocet, Xanax, ADHD meds, all of these very addictive substances. My community was strung right out. And I was like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. And, I was convinced by the stigma, like, you got to be weak in order to get addicted. And this was the lesson, God humbling me and showing me, no, like, the addiction is not a choice. Addiction, I had no choice in this. And, when I tried to refuse at the doctor's office, and I noticed because I was no longer on my parents' private insurance, I was now on state insurance. I was treated different. So they threatened me with child protective services when I tried to say, no, I don't want these. And so, of course, I'm like 20 years old and I'm terrified. So I do what I'm told. And they tell me, oh, you're on too small of a dose to get addicted. Only 1% get addicted from this study from 1949 that, these propagandists like love to cling to. It's like they had studies since then. They've updated their research. Like, let that one go. And so, the abuse got worse. And once I had my son, I didn't really try to keep my addiction intact. Mm-hmm. Like, I was doing more and, the trauma was bad. So I was like, I need these. And, I was in chronic pain all the time. So my addiction was slowly getting worse, over time. And, finally I went to the battered women's shelter. And after I lost my apartment in public affordable housing, I lost my apartment because of him, because the cops showed up. Nothing I did. And, this is what happens to battered women. This is, people say, well, why do they say? Well, you're 7 times more likely to die if you try to leave. When I tried to leave, I got held hostage and raped for 3 days. So this is what women go through when they try to leave. And, once I went to the shelter, they turned me away with 2 beds open and they said, your injuries are too extensive and it puts the other women in the shelter in danger. We can't help you.
Oh my gosh.
So,
well, let me stop you right there because this is, you've already, shared so much. I want to point out, you said you're Maine. right?
Yeah.
It's not a place people would think of as a stereotypical place where they would be peddling all these drugs for people to become addicted to. But this just goes to show it's everywhere.
It is absolutely everywhere.
So,
and I bring this up all the time with the state reps that I work with, because our former governor got on TV and said, Black thugs from the hood come from out of state and they come up here, impregnate our white women and flood our streets with drugs.
Oh my God.
I was in prison for selling drugs at this point. And I'm like, wait a minute, I was a drug dealer. Like, I participated in this. And, you're really trying to tell these people that because of Black thugs from out of state, first of all, these Black thugs never would have come up here without white police informants and white addicts going down and getting them. They would have never known to come up here and quadruple their money. Most people think Maine is part of Canada. And, that's just not even believable. As somebody that was in the streets and getting my hands dirty and seeing how these drugs came in, that's just not believable to me. And so it's this rooted white supremacy, systemic. And then once they get these drug dealers cross state lines, it's a whole other charge. It's federal, it's bigger, it's more time. And this is continuing. This is, pushing the system of white supremacy and mass incarceration.
Right.
They have bypassed slavery laws with mass incarceration.
Yeah.
They can't own people anymore and they can't make them work, but you can put them in prison and they'll be we were working for $5.25 a month, 40 hours a week. That's what we were getting paid.
Yeah.
A hospital seems $350,000 a year contracting their linen to be washed by inmates instead of paying regular Americans.
Wow.
This is all about a free workforce. This is not about an income.
Oh, 100%. I also want to flag, I used to work in Houston Area Women's Center.
Oh,
which
wow.
we had programs for not just women. It's now called Hawk because we have services for men, for children.
That's good, though.
A lot of people, but the domestic violence shelter that was off premises was for women. There was an area for single women and for women with kids. And there was a school on premises and all of that. And I know how hard it was for women to leave and come to that place. So the fact that you did eventually leave and you tried to get into a place and then they rejected you. I want to hear what happened next because you weren't able to get in there. You have 2 kids at this point, right? And were you selling drugs at this point or this is before?
No, this was before. I was in college.
Yeah.
Yes, I was slowly spiraling down, the addiction, nightmare. And I want to add something too, because this is a problem with victim-based shelters. A friend of mine tried to get into the sex trafficking shelter and they wouldn't take her because she wouldn't snitch her pimp out. Like, you are extorting these women's safety instead of helping them. You're getting funding from the government, you're getting donations, and you're choosing not to save this woman because she won't put somebody in jail for you. That is not her job. That is law enforcement's job.
Yeah.
So, there's a very big problem and a conversation that needs to be taking place. And I don't know what all the answers are, but I know this happened to me. And this was me at rock bottom. No. And I had made a deal with my father that if they wouldn't help me, I'd sign temporary guardianship over my kids. Once I did that, I lost all my health insurance, my resources.
Wow.
I lost everything by doing that. So I couldn't get my medications anymore. I couldn't go to the doctor anymore for manipulation therapy for, the head trauma. So I was self-medicating on the street, and it was drug dealers that helped me. It was drug dealers that gave me places to stay. It was drug dealers that gave me, wings to make money. And I'm not excusing them and saying they're all good people. But when you get down to it, most people are just trying to survive. Most of your drug dealers are just trying to pay rent and put food on the table. And they figure, hey, I can sell this prescription or my kids can go hungry. Oh. And this is the problem in America. If people's basic needs were met and they weren't working 60, 80 hours a week and still falling behind, crime wouldn't be so high.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's already devastating hearing everything that you had to go through. And the fact that there wasn't even anybody there to support you to say, if you give custody of your kids over, even temporarily, here's what's going to happen. And it's going to have this other domino effect that you weren't even aware of. So I'm like, where were those people who should have helped?
And I did that
process.
Yeah. And I did that to protect my kids because, if, my ex had just shown up with the cops or something like that, my father would have had to hand my son over. Well, okay. And then it would have been that whole nightmare of trying to get my son back, from a psychopath. So I didn't want to do that. I had to put my kids first. And, that was what it was at the time. and maybe there was another option out there that I couldn't find, but I had exhausted all other options, before I went down this road.
Yeah.
And, 70% of women in American prisons have some sort of domestic violence or sexual assault in their background before we even go to prison, before we even get arrested. We are the women that slip through the cracks that society failed.
Yeah.
And so, it's really easy to say, oh, they're a criminal. They deserve whatever they get. But, this is a country that stands on morals, supposedly, and, freedom and justice for all. And, the conditions of the prisons are third world nightmares. Down in Texas, we've had 58 inmates, I think, since June die of heat-related deaths because they don't have climate control in 70% of the prisons.
Yeah.
These people are slowly roasting to death. They're calling out numbers. Marcy, she's this content creator on TikTok. She did 10 years in a Texas prison, and she talks about this all the time. She said she watched an egg fry on the floor, and every day they come in to call out the temperature. And she said they were reaching numbers of 136.
Oh my God.
And this was years ago, before there was a heat wave.
Right.
I can't imagine what it is now. And, 85 to stay alive. These institutions should be mandated across the board to have climate control. Because I remember being up in Maine and freezing, absolutely freezing during the winter months. They don't even turn the heat on till, November 1st. And it gets cold. It snows in October. So, you're only allowed 2 blankets in there and they're like paper thin. So, the climate issue in there is a very big problem and the water goes off constantly. That even happened to us at Danbury. During the hottest days of the year, we went without water for 3 days.
Wow.
In all 3 facilities. And it wasn't even reaching numbers of like 107, 110 like it is in Texas this year. Mm-hmm. And the water is constantly going off with these inmates, and most inmates are nonviolent.
Yeah, 100%. But let's go back to, because obviously you're now an advocate, you're an artist, and you also have an environmentally friendly clothing brand, which I'm really excited to hear about. But before we get into that story, walk us through. So at this point, you don't have ability to get insurance. You can't go to your doctors to get therapy that you need. You're living wherever you can find a place to stay, selling drugs, because now you're fully addicted to these things that you couldn't be addicted to. Yeah. So then did you get arrested for selling drugs? And is that how you ended up in prison?
In 2011, I caught state charges. And this is another thing that made me mad because I was done. After I got done with my state bid, when I got busted in the hotel, got caught with bath salts and Suboxone and a couple other things. But the feds picked it up in 2013. And I was held accountable for the exact same drugs again. Oh, so there's no such thing as double jeopardy, when the feds pick it up. They're a different jurisdiction. And so you can get done doing 10 years in the state. And then on the day you get released, feds can pick you up for the exact same situation. And so I was now, on my way to federal prison and I had no idea how bad the treatment got. Like, a couple things happened when I was in the state. Like I watched a woman go into labor and they were refusing to take her to the hospital. And the only reason they did is because we threatened a riot. And then they told her if it was a false alarm that she was going to be punished and put in solitary confinement for wasting their money. Like, I love these people that think that inmates get free health care. 60% of the doctors in Alabama have lost their medical license. It's legal for doctors who have lost their medical license to practice on inmates and at needed clinics. Like, they are still actively committing genocide against people. But like my first week at Somerset County, I witnessed an entire pod of women get stripped out because a male sergeant wanted a list of who shaved their vaginas and who didn't. Those that did were punished. So whoever signed up to use a razor that night got stripped naked and, their genitals inspected just because a male wanted to see, if they were shaving, if they didn't.
Oh my God.
And these are the micro aggressions that go on. And predators flock to these institutions for employment because they know women like me will not be believed. Mm-hmm. We already have the mark against us for being felons. And, then a lot of us have mental diagnosis or are on heavy psych meds that the prison puts us on, and it completely discredits us automatically. And, it's horrible. And for the juveniles, the children, they like to dehumanize them by calling them juveniles. But, that's what they are. They're children. Right. And people forget that. They would send the juveniles from Long Creek to Cumberland with us when they became too much of a problem. basically what that meant is the child kept getting sexually assaulted and they finally flipped out. And, what this one girl stabbed a CO, so they sent her with us. They told her she was going back there on Christmas for her last 2 weeks, and she slit her throat that night.
Oh, no.
That was better than going back there. And, these institutions conduct their own investigations. So enough said, nothing ever happens. And when I was at Somerset, I was forced to strip in front of cameras under duress of being maced and extracted, with the female sergeant telling me to kill myself. She told another inmate to kill themselves, and they had to cut that inmate down from a suicide attempt. She still works there. She's still getting her pension from the taxpayers' money. Like, this is what people are paying for. So when I got to Alderson, I filed a PREA complaint against them. Now, PREA complaint stands for Prison Rape Elimination Act. Now, it doesn't do anything. And when they got the results back from Somerset County from conducting their own investigation, they admitted to everything I was complaining about, and they deemed it unfounded. So that's how they prevent it from going to an outside source. They just deem it unfounded, and then that's it. So Alderson wouldn't even allow me to hold this piece of paper with the response on it to read it myself. They wouldn't give me a copy. They wouldn't, allow me to send it home. So when you file a complaint, you have 100 days when you get out of prison to file a complaint. If you don't have the paperwork from the time, if there's an outcry at the time or anything like that, I went to the Freedom of Information Act and the DOJ. Neither could find this complaint.
Wow.
And then after I got out, Captain Grimes at Alderson and 4 of his subordinates all got convicted of raping and stalking inmates and tampering with PREA evidence. So I was far from their only victim. And this is kind of what pushed me, into advocacy, because it was in the paper, like I said, that there was that inmate who tried to hang themselves. But Somerset County was refusing to hand over officer disciplinary records to the media. And then when they finally did, it would say, oh, so-and-so got sent home for 3 days, but not why. So their corruption runs so deep. And, I'm working with state reps to get that PREA loophole, closed, because by law, they have to give me the paperwork, and I've requested it. They're refusing. They told me to get a lawyer and everything. I got a lawyer. They said to subpoena it. You can't subpoena anything without an open case. And they know that. So they just ignore you. So I'm proposing that for every day an institution stonewalls somebody on this paperwork or whatever they're requesting, it's like $500 a day. There has to be a consequence,
right?
To get accountability. They love enforcing the law, but they don't like abiding by it.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. I'm in California, and it's the same thing here. It doesn't matter where you are. There are many, many issues with the prison pipeline and all the issues and the systemic issues that go on with it and how we treat people. So you were in jail for the state charges, and then you had to go to federal. And how long did you have to go to federal? And how did you, while you're navigating through all of these crazy experiences and hardships and not getting answers and not getting seen and heard and validated for the truth, how did you then turn your life around and decide to create art and beauty out of this pain?
Well, I was an artist in prison. I painted murals. That was my job at Danbury. I was paid $57 a month. And I did 3 years total, but I only made it like 6 months on probation before I went back. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But my side hustle in prison was I'd paint inmates' coffee cups, and I'd sand them down and paint them and then seal it with floor wax so it wouldn't wash off. I'd also take the back of, notebooks and use that as canvas. And, the women there were just so supportive. Like, people want you to think that you're going to go to prison and it's going to be the most catty, vicious females. I found the greatest women in there. They're so supportive, and, they became my family, and we're still in contact to this day. I never would have, if it wasn't for Dawn, who's, a self-help coach now, and she's doing great things. And if it hadn't been for her, believing in me and pushing me and not taking no for an answer, I wouldn't have ever tried to do portraits. And I'm actually really good at them. So I'm just so grateful to her that, she believed in me more than I did. And over the pandemic, I had my first art show. So I was 2 years out. And, if it hadn't been for Janet Mills changing the policy when I got out, I don't know if I'd be where I am now. Janet Mills took over for Paula Page, and she expanded main care. So just that little tiny thing of me getting, health insurance, I could go to MAT treatment, I could get mental health trauma therapy. that was what made all the difference in the world. And, here I am almost 6 years later, and I'm, talking to great people like you and going on podcasts and, getting bills put on the table. And, I have a brand that's being sold in stores. And I found this great brand called The Galleries. They're from Canada. And they basically turn your art into this beautiful feminine brand. And it comes in plus sizes. So it's really inclusive, which I'm really happy about because I'm all about inclusivity. And, I created this, brand during my own healing journey. So I just want to put out a product that, inspires women and lifts them up. We live in a society that is full blown misogyny and rape culture. And it's just from the start, we're told that our value and worth depends on how skinny and pretty we are. Mm-hmm. And, it just shouldn't be like that. And so I'm so glad that this brand, it comes in all sizes. And I just want to inspire all women, whatever your gender, whatever you go by, I support you and I love you. And I just, wanted to create something that people feel empowered by. Well, I got some stuff to show you.
Yeah.
So this is one of my placemats.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So there's different stuff on there too. There's like placemats, handkerchiefs, bags. Yeah. Aprons. This is one of my bags too.
Awesome.
And this comes in dresses and pants and everything else. And I do wholesale if anybody wants to carry this brand and have something different in their store.
Yeah.
And you can see all the paintings on the website and they come on the tags too.
That's really beautiful. Are you ready to take your brand to new heights? Join the Brand Amplifier for Entrepreneurs program. Learn how to build, elevate, and amplify your brand with a comprehensive 10-module course. Learn more about it and other ways to implement our strategies at fullcapacitymarketing.com. Click on EFCM Learning Hub for more information. Can't wait to help you amplify your brand. So let's talk about how did you go from painting murals and art into deciding to also start a clothing line and having your art repurposed on other materials? So that's one question. Also, I want to find out what happened with your kids. Are you still living in Maine? Where are you living now? And talk about your advocacy journey. So that's 20 questions, but
okay. So it actually popped up on my Facebook one day and I was saying to myself, I want a way to put my art out there that's I'll make money and, it actually get out there. Because you spend 20 hours on a painting and people only want to pay $10 for it. So that's really frustrating when you're starting out. So when I saw the ad, I was like, oh, that's cool. That's perfect. That's what I want to do. And so the advocacy, it was actually, there was this cop up in Calais that gave this woman's child drugs to give to the woman who was paying him for these drugs through sexual favors. Oh. He was extorting her addiction and they eventually all got caught. But they didn't charge him with a sex crime. And so I called the DA up. I'm like, why didn't you charge him with a sex crime? He preyed on her addiction. He's a cop of 30 years. And, they're going to use that as his defense. That should be more of a reason to lock him up.
Right.
He's well-versed in addiction. He knew what he was doing. Woman who's been to prison, if a cop were to come on to me, the only thing I'm thinking is, what am I going to jail for when I say no? And that's the reality for, women like us. And so I don't know if that woman actually felt she could say no.
Yeah.
And that needs to be taken into consideration. And, with correctional officers, there's no such thing as consent because of the power difference. And, we're being contained. So I told him, I started writing he suggested I write to the legislatures. He's like, you made a really good argument, but the way the law is written, it was technically consent. But
wow.
You could change this if you talk to some of the main state legislatures. So that's what I did. I wrote to them and I got my point across to some of them. And Charlotte Warren said she was going to put some referendums in with some bills. And because bottom line, it should be the same with cops as it is with correctional officers. There's just too much of a power difference.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say no to these people. And some of them, it goes to their head. We see cops shooting people every day in this country. And, there should just be a clear, definite line that no, while you're on the job and while you're rocking the badge, there's no such thing as consent. And why are you getting sexually gratified on the job anyway?
Yeah. Lots of questions.
I mean, and if you have to use your badge to get laid, you should just, take a seat because that, you have no game, basically. You've been emasculated as far as I'm concerned. And then I found out when they were having hearings, and I would go and I would bring up my arguments, you know, whether it was, you know, about a bill getting passed or, you know, city council dealing with the homeless problem, because the homeless problem exploded over, you know, the pandemic. We went from 3 empty properties per homeless person to 29. And all the prisons across America were taking out PPP loans to add wings onto their facilities. So, you know, this is all about a free workforce. And it's pretty funny that all these corporations stood up and said, oh, we'll buy all your prisons, but they have to stay 90% full capacity. This is product to them. These humans are products to them. And, you know, this is where we're headed. So now in some cities, you can't even feed homeless people without getting a fine. They're criminalizing this group of people. So what comes next? You're going to put them all in jail and you're going to put them to work for pennies a day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's back to like, I'm watching Call the Midwife, which is that I just started watching it, but there's so many of the characters in it have been in the workhouses, right? I think that's what they're called, where basically you have nothing else to do. So you go sign your life away to work for nothing, but just so you have a roof over your head. And
yes.
It's very similar to that.
Yes. And, you know, this is another thing that's going to anger your listeners who are tax-paying Americans. First of all, your entire education history is in your PSI. So whether you've been to college, whether you've been, you know, where you went to college, all that stuff, your entire history is in that paperwork. So they have this information. So then they tell the inmates, you have to get your high school transcripts or you're going to be enrolled in the GED. Because they get $2,000 for every person who's enrolled in the GED, then another $2,000 once they graduate. So the inmates who have no means of looking up a phone number or access to the internet and have to pay $15 for a phone call, you know, they have no way to get these things for themselves. And they know that. And so we had women with bachelor's degrees being forced to take the GED. And, you know, of course they got it. And then to cut corners again, they'll have the inmates with bachelor's degrees teach the inmates that actually need their GED. And you know what? That's great if you don't have a GED. You should absolutely do everything you can to get your life together so you can be productive when you get out, but not just to make these scumbags more money. I mean, it's one big money pit. And, you know, a package of ramen noodle, when I was in prison, it cost 10 cents on the outside. In there, it cost $1.10. So they're extorting us every way possible in there. And, you know, they get the stuff in bulk for cheap. And, you know, women will make their own tampons because they never have them on the commissary. They only get enough for like a quart of the inmates. And then they jack the price up, you know, 3 times what they cost on the outside. So women will literally make their own tampons and end up getting infections because they're so desperate. And, you know, this was a bill that we just got passed in Maine, that all jail facilities are mandated to now provide tampons and pads free of charge.
Wow.
And it's a problem. That should be right across the board. You know, you're getting over $100 per day per inmate. So why can't you provide tampons and, you know, sanitary items that actually work?
Yeah. And that's usually something you think about in developing countries.
Right.
That's what you usually hear about is girls can't go to school because if it's that time of the month and they don't have supplies, they don't feel comfortable and they'll be ostracized. But it's not something you think about happening here in the United States.
Yeah, and it does every day. And the game, you know, I've watched women guards tell inmates that ask for more pads because we ran out, oh, go ahead, bleed on yourself. What do I care? So the game became go up to the biggest, most masculine male guard and make him feel as uncomfortable as possible because he will go get more than enough for everybody. But it's like, well, you shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to like go through that just to get, you know, sanitary items. And I'm not sitting here trying to bash all guards because the truth is for every officer that harmed me, there was another risking their job trying to make it stop. And that's the problem in itself. Bad behavior gets rewarded and the good cops that actually protect us and might, you know, change somebody's life in there, they risk losing their job and they never get, you know, up the chain.
So from prison to being entrepreneurial before you went into prison. And then now you've shifted into art and advocacy and you're helping change things for other people who are coming behind you. Are you still in Maine doing your advocacy?
No, and I am down in Texas, actually. I've been down here since like last February, but we travel around a lot. And my book is about to come out. It's called No Justice, Just Us. And I'm signing the publishing deal Monday, and I'm so excited about
Congratulations. That's huge.
I started writing this in prison, like while this stuff was happening to me. And, it's actually going to be in 2 parts, possibly 3, but it was way too long for just one book. So this book goes like getting sentenced, and it explains the whole legality of everything. And it goes into great detail about the abuse and the systemic corruption and everything else. It's a book that everybody should read because nobody knows what's really going on. And this could be, your daughter, your mother, they don't care. And what goes on to people with mental health issues and the elderly in prison, like, it's horrifying. I was in prison with a 78-year-old little old lady, and the only thing she did was try to get her kneecap replaced. She needed knee surgery to walk, and her husband was a vet, and her insurance wouldn't cover it. So she lied on the insurance form and said she was single. They came and busted her house open.
Oh my gosh.
They had a SWAT team and everything. So I'm so sick of these people crying over Mar-a-Lago and the raid on Mar-a-Lago. Like, they knocked. Shut up. This woman was just trying to get knee surgery, and they blew her door off the hinges, came in with automatic guns. Like, these are your criminals that are locked up. And they gave her 18 months for that.
Well,
like, we are the only country that doesn't have universal health care, and we have more than enough money to do it. These insurance companies are destroying people. Like, you shouldn't go under because, a family member has, a health problem or needs surgery or God knows what. Like, this is disgusting. The medical mafia needs to go in this country.
So you're in Texas now, and your kids, were you able to repair a relationship with them or continue to have a relationship with them?
I do have a relationship with them. My dad did adopt them, but I'm still very close with them. When I got out, I was on lithium, and it turns out I'm not bipolar like I was formally diagnosed, but I only had 3 weeks of sobriety when I got that diagnosis. And you're supposed to have at least 10 months of sobriety before you get like an actual diagnosis. Because the drugs are still making your system go haywire. And turns out I'm actually high functioning autistic. And I've had the sensory issues my whole life, and, I process things faster. And, at some points I'll excel a lot, but then, in other, normal situations, like, I get burnt out, overwhelmed, and, and that's okay. I just had to figure out, what my deal was. And a lot of these psych meds, like lithium, they end up putting me in psychosis or making me suicidal or, something that isn't normal for me. So when I got out, the lithium I was on wasn't filtering through my kidneys properly. And I eventually, I was hearing sirens that weren't there. I thought there was a SWAT team outside my house. Like, it was really bad. And I didn't even go out. Like, I didn't leave my house for like 6 weeks. Like, it was really, really bad. And, they just kept trying to force more medications on me. And it's like, when I got to prison, the prison doctor said, "Why are you on these antidepressants?" And I'm like, "Because the jail put me on them." Like, what do you mean? And then they tell me, well, with a bipolar 2 diagnosis, antidepressants can make you homicidal or suicidal. And I go, well, that explains a lot then. That explains a lot. Like, they're so quick to give out medication, and, no one ever talks about when you get them wrong. And so my book goes into that too, like the mental health issues of it all. Like, I really go deep into that because, there are so many kids out there getting wrongfully diagnosed and not understanding what's happening to them. And that's so scary. It's so scary when that happens because you're scared to tell anybody. You don't want to get, put in an institution or locked up or put into solitary. So you just keep it in and you don't like really know what's going on. And I had to advocate for myself. And I had all these counselors putting it in their notes that I was being defiant because I didn't want to take their medication. And come to find out, high functioning autistic, no medication is going to help me.
Yeah.
Like,
so what was that turning point that finally, like, you were able to get off the lithium and get the proper diagnosis?
Yeah. Well, it was a long process, and I still struggle with going to crowded places. Prison rewires your brain, and so did these psych meds. So I had 2 of these things working against me, and I really had to get my trauma under control, before I got off MAT treatment and everything else. I was literally having a panic attack every time I left my house. And that was the problem on probation too. When I got out, they give you a month's supply of meds. And when I go to the pharmacy, it was like $1,300 worth of psych meds. And I didn't have a job yet. I didn't have any way to pay for these meds. So I go to the state and I'm like, please help me pay for these meds so I don't violate and lose my mind. Because if you just stop taking psych meds, the detox is very dangerous. Like your heart can stop. A lot of bad things can happen. And they told me the only way you're going to get health insurance is if you get pregnant. And I'm like, I'm just trying to be okay enough to be there for my kids who are already here.
Yeah.
And, this is what people deal with when they get out. Not only you have the shock of getting out of prison, and solitary confinement literally slows the brain down from the lack of stimulation. So it makes normal stimulation feel completely overwhelming. That's why so many people freak out and end up going back. And it's not that they want to go back to prison, but that's the only thing that feels normal or
safe or just so twisted. Whew. Okay. So now you live in Texas. You have a relationship with your kids. You have a book coming out. You have your environmentally friendly clothing brand. You're still making art, murals, things like that as well.
Yeah, I was just talking to a church. Hopefully they'll put me on to do it, but I would love to do a church mural, like a real one out in the world, not just on jail walls. I would absolutely love to do that.
What advice would you give for people who are listening, who are entrepreneurs, who are looking to hire people? Like, what would you say to them to say, what's the case for hiring somebody who has been in prison and has come out the other side?
If it's within their first year of being out of prison, you get a tax deductible for hiring a felon fresh out of prison. And so, the felons you hire that are fresh out of prison, they will be so grateful and loyal to you because you gave them a chance. And, some of them might relapse and go back to prison, but, if they're given the slightest chance and they're given support and they're given help, nobody wants that life. Everybody wants to be okay. Yeah. But, we are just set up to fail. And, to fix these problems, you have to have empathy and compassion. I mean, unless if you're just a sociopath that is okay with what's going on and you're okay with certain groups of people being harmed because of whatever. Like, I've literally had conservative women tell me, if you don't want to get raped in prison, then don't go to jail. Just say you're okay with certain groups of women getting raped because that's what you need. And if you don't realize that, then you need to do some serious soul searching because, I didn't get better until I was shown compassion and empathy and treated like a human being. Yeah. You have to understand, people have very hard walks of life. And yes, I messed up. I did wrong, but I also did everything I could to fix it and do better. And, we can get better. The only people that can't be rehabilitated are sex offenders, and 98% of them never see the inside of a jail cell. So you are locking up non-violent people with medical issues. That's what it is. Or, battered women who couldn't take it and finally snapped. Like, I was in prison with a lot of women who should have gotten self-defense, who never should have been charged at all. But, if God forbid you kill one of their white men, that's, you're not going to get away with it.
Wow. What is the easiest way for people to find your art and make a purchase from you?
So the website is legalaries.com/en/Elizabeth.Mikotowicz. And you have to put my name at the end because there are other artists that are with Legalaries, and that will just bring you to their main page. But I am also on TikTok and Instagram, and the handles are the same. It's EPM_art_1111. And I am all for doing collabs, advocacy,
Awesome.
Speaking events, all about it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I will definitely lift your links into the show notes. And then you'll have to let us know when your book comes out so then we can add that link as well so that people can purchase it. Thank you for being on. It's so hard to hear stories like this, but we need to because we need to know what's really going on in the world. Yeah, we need to know what we can do to help people and to reframe conversations.
If anybody wants to help, you can volunteer at your local jails and prisons, and you can, start a book club. You could do an AA meeting. You could, show them. There was a guy that came in and taught us English. Like, he would give us writing prompts and, stuff like that. Inspire them. They will be so grateful. And you can hear these stories for yourself. A lot of people just had bad luck, bad childhoods, if they were just given the proper tools, even a lifeline, you might save a kid's life, especially in the juvenile facilities. If you give them a safe person to report to and, something's going on, you could bring this to your local state legislatures or politicians and tell them like these kids need help. They are getting abused by corrupt jail officials. And, you know, that's what I would do if I wasn't I could volunteer at jails.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Elizabeth, and your journey. It's really inspiring to see where you are now.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see what you do next. I do want to ask, do you have a favorite quote or mantra or some words that you live by that you would want to share with us?
Tough times don't last. Tough people do.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that is definitely a mantra for life in this episode.
And laughter makes the pain go down easier. Something I always said in prison.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and journey with my listeners.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Take this
really
as a
good
source of inspiration, everybody. Seriously, like think about what you can do to help somebody. Think about what you can do to make somebody else. And remember that we shouldn't judge each other because we all have a story and we all have a background. And the only way for us to lift each other up is to humanize each other and have empathy.
Absolutely. And always believe in yourself. You know, when I first started talking to these state reps, I was like, why would they listen to me? Like, I'm just a woman out of prison, recovering addict. I got a brain injury. Like, why would they listen? And then it was like, no, why wouldn't they listen to me? I'm their sales statistic. I've been in, you know, the gutters. I know what needs to be fixed. And they'd be stupid not to listen to me. So, you know, just change that inner thinking and, you know, you will be surprised how far you can go. Yeah. I'm still surprising myself. I never thought I'd be, you know, this far doing this good.
I love that. Well, please keep in touch and let me know when your book comes out and what happens for you next, because I would love to support you.
Thank you.
Of course. And thank you to my listeners for listening to another episode with an amazing brand story that hopefully will serve as some inspiration and some things to think about for you as you're going through your journey. With that, I'll be back again in a few days with another amazing guest. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.